You have no right to stand here. Blacks like you should know their place." The white police officer shouted as he pressed a gun to the head of a grieving mother, standing in full uniform at her son's military funeral. Everyone froze, cameras flashed. 15 other officers were present, yet none intervened. They just stood there, silent, cold. That woman wasn't just anyone. She was Major General Loretta James, the first black woman to lead a U.S. Army brigade, a decorated veteran of Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. But at that moment, she wasn't a commander, she was a mother consumed by grief. And she didn't kneel, didn't cry, didn't run. She simply reached out to receive the folded flag from her son's casket, even with a loaded gun against her temple. In a nation that prides itself on liberty and justice, how could something like this happen to a general? And why didn't anyone dare to speak up? You're about to hear a true story, one of racist abuse in the system, the pain endured by a black mother, and the silent power that brought an entire country to its knees. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The wheels touched down on the Atlanta tarmac, shaking Major General Loretta James awake. She hadn't truly slept in days. Not since the knock on the door. Not since they told her her only son, Major Terrence James, was never coming home. Killed in a drone strike outside Raqqa. Now, as the plane taxied toward the gate, she stared out the window. The skyline of her hometown rising. A place she once called safe. But nothing felt safe now. The metals on her uniform caught the Georgia sun. They used to feel like armor. Today, they felt like bricks. Every step off that plane was a step deeper into grief. She carried herself with military discipline. Chin high, spine straight. And yet, nothing in war had prepared her for this return. A young boy tugged his mother's sleeve. "Is she a superhero?" he whispered. Loretta smiled gently. She didn't know. The real battle hadn't even begun. The terminal buzzed with life. But Loretta barely heard it. She moved with silent precision, heading toward baggage claim. Then, "Ma'am, I need you to step aside." She turned. A white TSA officer stood there, name tag R, Malloy. Eyes cold, voice sharper than policy. "Random screening," he said. Loretta didn't flinch. "I just came from Washington. Military bereavement orders. Here's my ID." Malloy took it, turned it over like it was fake. "A black woman. General," he sneered. "You sure this isn't Halloween?" She stayed calm. "Those medals were earned. I'm here to bury my son." "Oh, I'm sure there's a story," Malloy replied, smirking. He waved over 2 more officers. And just like that, a war hero was treated like a suspect. They made her strip off her uniform jacket, inspected her medals, scanned her ID 5 times, laughed at her travel orders. "This your kid Malloy," scoffed. "Guess he got what was coming." Around them, people stared, but no one spoke, no one intervened. Just silence, thick, uncomfortable. 2 hours, 2 hours of humiliation at an airport in her own country. Then Carla arrived, Loretta's daughter, her voice sharp with fury. "That's my mother. This is harassment." Malloy stepped in her way. "Interfere, and you'll be arrested too." Loretta raised her hand. "Carla." "Enough." Her voice was calm, but her eyes glistened. Finally, they let her go. No apology, no dignity. At the curb, Carla whispered through clenched teeth, "You're just going to let that happen?" Loretta answered, "Today, We buried Terrence, nothing else matters. But behind them, Malloy pulled out his phone. Target confirmed. The General is here. A voice replied on the other end. Good. The Sentinels are ready. The next morning, the James family home in East Atlanta was quiet. Too quiet. Relatives and soldiers filled the living room, sharing memories of Terrence. But upstairs, Loretta sat alone in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by faded trophies, yearbook photos, and her late mother's cross-stitch on the wall. Here, she allowed the grief to rise. Finally. Tears rolled freely. Her hands clutched Terrence's army photo, creased and worn from years on the road. Then, a soft knock. Her father, Walter, stepped in, his cane tapping against the floor. He was 81, a Korean War vet, and the man who first taught her how to salute. They told me it was enemy fire, he said plainly. I don't buy it. Loretta wiped her tears. Dad, what do you mean? Walter pulled a small envelope from his jacket. It came in the mail, addressed to you. I didn't open it, but it's from him. Inside, a USB drive and a handwritten note. If anything happens to me, give this to Mom. Trust no one but her. Loretta inserted the USB into her laptop. The screen blinked. Then, folders appeared. Dozens. Photos, videos, documents, all titled and time-stamped. Terrence hadn't just been serving. He'd been investigating. Black veterans, being harassed, followed, set up. A group of officers, calling themselves the Sentinels, was targeting black military personnel once they returned home. False arrests, falsified records, even fatal mistakes. And there, in 3 different surveillance photos, Officer R. Malloy. Same smug face, same cold eyes, always lingering at veteran hangouts. One folder made her stomach twist chain of command. It contained redacted records from military channels. The Sentinels weren't just cops, they had allies in uniform. High up. Someone had used real deployment systems to move black soldiers into harm's way, including Terrence. A knock at the door pulled Loretta back. It was Carla, with a young Asian officer behind her. Mom, this is Officer Daniel Tran. He worked with Terrence. Tran looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder. I don't have much time, he said quickly. Your son reached out after one of his Navy friends was beaten during a traffic stop. Terrence connected it to others, all black, all veterans. Tran handed Loretta a second flash drive. Terrence gave me a backup. I've been collecting from inside, but they're watching. The Sentinels are in every precinct, even the DA's office. Loretta's voice was steel. And you still came. Tran nodded. He trusted you. Said if anything happened, you'd finish what he started. For the first time in days, Loretta stood taller. Tears gone, mission clear. She wasn't just a grieving mother anymore. She was a soldier. And now the war was at home. The sun rose over Eden Hill National Cemetery. Birdsong drifted across white rows of gravestones. This was the day Loretta James feared. The day she would bury her son. Major Terrence James, combat veteran, decorated leader, killed far from home by an enemy he never saw. But the enemy she feared now wasn't across the ocean. It was waiting here. Loretta arrived early, her dress uniform immaculate, her spine unshaken. But as she approached the entrance gate, she froze. Officer R. Malloy, standing in full police uniform, smiling like nothing had happened. Behind him, 18 officers in black. Each one had been hand-picked for today's security, and every one was a confirmed Sentinel, As mourners began arriving, the plan became clear. White attendees waved through checkpoints, no questions, no scans. But black guests were stopped, searched, questioned. Many were turned away. Even Terrence's former unit members were blocked from entering. By 10 a.m., a clear racial line had been drawn, right there at his funeral. Still, Loretta stood tall, flanked by her father, Walter, and her daughter, Carla. The coffin lay before her, draped in the American flag. Television cameras zoomed in. This was national now. When her name was called, Loretta stepped forward, the wind catching her words as if even nature held its breath. "My son," she said, "believed in a country that could live up to its promises. He fought, bled, and died for an America he believed could be better." Malloy moved closer, hand on his belt, eyes locked on her. She continued, stronger now. "Terrence wrote to me. Before his death, he warned of corruption, of a system that targets its own, especially if they're black and brave." She pulled a folded letter from her pocket. He said, "Mom, if anything happens to me, know this wasn't war, this was sabotage." Gasps echoed. Phones rose. The air was electric. Then a blur. Malloy shoving past the honor guard. Gun drawn, raised, pressed to Loretta's temple. A sharp gasp rippled across the cemetery. Cameras flashed. "Blacks like you," he snarled, "don't get to speak for this country." Blood trickled down her cheek where the gun's sight grazed her skin. Yet she didn't flinch. She didn't beg, didn't cry. She reached, slowly, for her son's folded flag. Her fingers barely touched it when a shot rang out. Chaos exploded. Malloy's partner fired into the sky. "She is armed," he shouted. Lies, all lies. Loretta was tackled, dragged to the dirt, cuffed, her face in the soil beside her son's grave. The image burned into every camera lens. Carla screamed. Walter tried to lunge, but they were held back. Then, a voice, deep, commanding. "What in God's name is going on here?" An FBI badge held high, Agent Marcus Bellamy. And just like that, the tide began to turn. The sound of the gunshot hadn't even stopped echoing when the first video hit social media. Within minutes, millions had seen it. A white police officer, gun pressed to the temple of a black woman wearing full military dress. The crowd didn't blink, the officers didn't move, and in the center, General Loretta James, kneeling beside her son's grave. That image broke something in America. News anchors stopped mid-report. Veterans called into radio shows, choking on their own rage. Civil rights groups issued statements. So did the White House. Vague, calculated, too slow. But the streets moved faster than politicians. By nightfall, outside Harris County Jail, a line had formed. First 10, then 50, then hundreds. Men and women in uniform, standing silent, each one with a folded flag in their hands. No signs, no slogans, just silence, the kind that speaks louder than shouting. From Montana to Miami, from Harlem to Houston, black service members stood in parks, on courthouse steps, outside police stations, because they saw themselves in her, and in her silence, they heard a call to rise. The walls inside Harris County Jail were painted the color of surrender, dull gray, like hope that had given up trying. General Loretta James sat on a hard steel bench in a holding cell meant for runaways and drunks. But she wasn't just anyone, and this wasn't just another arrest. She still wore her uniform, creased now, stained with soil from the grave where she was tackled. The cut on her temple had dried blood trailing down to her collar. But no one offered a bandage, no one offered a phone call, no one even called her ma'am. "In here," one guard sneered, "those stars on your shoulders mean nothing. To us, you're just another black inmate with a superiority complex." Another officer deliberately mishandled her fingerprints, forcing her to redo them twice. "You sure this isn't fake?" he mocked. "Looks like Halloween costume stuff to me." Hours passed. Her request for medical attention was under review. Her daughter was outside, her name on every news ticker in the country. But in here, she was alone, isolated. Not from criminals, but from a system designed to grind down dignity. She closed her eyes, inhaled slow. They could take her time, her comfort, her freedom, but they would never take her mission. Outside the cold walls of Harris County Jail, a quiet revolution was forming. No chants, no bullhorns, no clashes with riot police, just silence. But that silence, it carried thunder. By noon, over 1,000 veterans had gathered. Some in dress blues, some in camouflage, some just wearing the medals they earned, pinned to civilian jackets. They lined the sidewalk, shoulder to shoulder, like a human shield. In their hands, each held a folded American flag, the kind given to families when a soldier dies. But today, those flags weren't symbols of loss. They were declarations. We see her. We believe her. We will not look away. Inside the jail, Loretta sat in a dim corner, unaware that the world was rearranging itself around her name, until she heard it, faint at first. A voice. Then another and another. From outside, chanting not in anger but in unity. "General James, General James, General James." Again and again. Agent Marcus Bellamy stood at the front of the line. FBI badge visible, voice firm. "I'm not leaving without her." Inside, a guard turned pale. "They've got the feds out there." But Loretta didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just whispered, "The line is drawn." And she waited. The jail doors opened at dawn, not with ceremony, but with calculation. No apologies, no press conference, just a release slip handed to General Loretta James like she was being returned from a borrowed mistake. But outside, a storm had gathered. Rows of soldiers snapped to attention. Media cameras clicked like gunfire. And the crowd, it didn't cheer, it saluted. Loretta stepped into the light, still wearing the soiled uniform, head held high, eyes straight ahead. Carla ran into her arms. Agent Bellamy followed close behind. "Let's get you to a safe location," he said. But Loretta shook her head. "I'm not hiding." Her voice was hoarse but unbroken. Back at the hotel, she found what she expected, a warning. Slid under her door, a plain envelope. Inside, a grainy photo of her speaking at the funeral. A red X was drawn over her face. And at the bottom, 3 words, typed in all caps. "Silence or consequences." She placed it on the table. No panic, no fear. Instead, she looked to Carla, to Bellamy, and to the growing wall of files before them. "The shadow's awake now," she said. "Let's show them we're not afraid of the dark." They met in a borrowed room above a downtown veterans center. Walls covered in faded flags, old campaign posters, and the smell of loyalty long taken for granted. Loretta stood at the head of the room, still in uniform, still carrying the weight of a mother and a general. Across from her sat Agent Marcus Bellamy. Next to him, Officer Daniel Tran, bruises still fresh, but eyes sharp with purpose. Carla paced near the whiteboard, listing names and dates from Terrence's files. The Sentinels were real, but they weren't just rogue cops. They were connected, across states, across departments, into military channels. They had reach, they had silence, and they had friends in very high places. "We need allies," Loretta said firmly, "not just protests, not just press. We need people inside the system who still remember what justice looks like." One by one, they arrived. A state attorney, a retired general, a military chaplain who had once buried 5 black soldiers in non-honors sections without asking why. Each person brought something, evidence, access, or just a name of someone too scared to speak, but ready to stand. They weren't just building a case, they were building a front line. The war came back not with bullets, but with headlines. That night, Loretta's face appeared on cable news, but not as a hero. A commentator sneered, "Is this woman mentally fit for command?" There are whispers about her leadership record. Social media bots flooded timelines. Affirmative action failure. Disgraced general arrested. Was her son really a hero or a problem? The smear campaign had begun, coordinated, precise, designed to fracture public support before it hardened into something powerful. Inside their operations room, Carla slammed her laptop shut. "They're leaking doctored reports, making it look like you were under investigation for misconduct." Agent Bellamy scowled. "This isn't just dirty politics. This is a counter-op." He pulled out a map. Everything leads back to a man named Vance Holloway, former police commissioner, now senior advisor to a USS, a senator with presidential ambitions. Loretta didn't flinch. Then we hit back, not with rumors, with truth. Officer Tran stepped forward. "I have recordings, of meetings, of names." He handed over a drive. "It's not everything, but it's enough to make them sweat." Loretta nodded. "We don't need all of them to fall, just the first. And the rest will follow like dominoes." The day started like any other in the city of power. Traffic hummed, coffee steamed, suits hurried through revolving doors. But at precisely 7:30 a.m., that rhythm cracked. Federal agents in dark jackets and quiet shoes moved simultaneously through homes, offices, and the heart of Houston PD. Arrest warrants, sealed indictments, files thicker than law books. The targets, the Sentinels. And at the top of the list, Officer Rick Malloy, Chief Vance Holloway, and 3 city judges who had turned justice into a controlled game board. News helicopters swarmed the skies. Camera crews raced to keep up. But inside Houston Police Headquarters, something else was happening. General Loretta James, accompanied by Agent Bellamy and Carla, walked through the main corridor. Not as suspects, not as victims, but as witnesses, armed with truth. The receptionist stammered. I wasn't told to expect." "You weren't," Bellamy replied. "But now everyone will." Loretta handed over a sealed evidence folder. Inside, a transcription of Tran's recordings, GPS data, and a complete map of the Sentinel chain of command. No room for denial, no wiggle for politics. This wasn't just an accusation. It was the start of a reckoning. By midday, the ripple became a wave. Live broadcasts cut away from celebrity gossip to breaking news banners. Dozens of Houston officers arrested in civil rights raid. FBI exposes organized racism ring inside law enforcement. There, in crisp military dress, stood General Loretta James. Shoulders back, medals shining, voice calm. This is not a story of one officer. she said before a wall of microphones. "It's a system, and we have the proof. Not rumors, not feelings, evidence." Agent Bellamy took the podium next. He named names, spoke facts. The public leaned in, and behind the scenes, the panic began. Senator Holloway, long seen as untouchable, hurried into a private conference call with federal contacts. "Shut it down," he barked. "Contain the fallout, discredit the sources." But the fire had already breached the walls. Internal emails leaked, financial records surfaced, judges, prosecutors, even a military logistics officer, all caught in the net. Carla turned from her laptop. "They're trying to freeze the investigation, but it's too late." Loretta nodded. "We've cracked the door open. Now we kick it in." The next blow came from the place they least expected, inside the courthouse itself. Judge Helena Marks, a conservative appointee with a reputation for discretion, called an emergency session. Live cameras were barred, but word leaked within the hour. She had signed off on the first formal indictments against senior members of the Sentinel network. Charges: conspiracy, civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, and, in 2 cases, manslaughter. One of those names was Officer Rick Malloy. Another, a former Pentagon advisor linked to Terrence's altered deployment orders. Loretta read the names as if she already knew them, because she did. Not from news, but from the silence she'd faced at every checkpoint, every hearing, every funeral. Now, that silence was cracking. Reporters flooded the courthouse steps. Veterans raised flags outside federal buildings. Even military brass issued statements of deep concern and support for independent review. Senator Holloway tried to pivot, called the arrests politically motivated, but his hands, they were already dirty on half the evidence. And inside his office, a staffer pressed send, forwarding key documents to Agent Bellamy's encrypted inbox. The fall had begun, and this time there would be no parachutes. It began with a single voice. Broadcast live from Capitol Hill. General Loretta James, in full uniform, stood before Congress. Not behind closed doors, not in some military tribunal, but on national television. The room fell still. Cameras clicked once, then went quiet. "I stand here," she began, "not just as a soldier, but as a mother who buried her son twice." Murmurs swept the chamber. She let the silence settle. "First, I buried Major Terrence James, combat veteran, killed under suspicious orders. Then, I buried him again, when this country allowed his funeral to become a battlefield." She opened a folder. Inside, copies of deployment records, redacted emails, photos. Proof of manipulation, of racism, of betrayal from within. My son believed that justice was not a privilege. It was a promise. Her voice didn't shake, but the hands of a few lawmakers did. She locked eyes with them. "You ask what lesson we've learned. Let me tell you, injustice doesn't need shadows anymore. It walks in broad daylight wearing a badge, a title, or even a flag. Across the nation, millions watched, and for once they listened. The next day, the Texas state capitol stood still. Inside its marble chambers, something rare was happening. Both parties, left and right, stood side by side to sign the James Military Justice Act into law. Governor Elaine Forrester, flanked by veterans, civil rights leaders, and active duty soldiers, held the ceremonial pen in trembling fingers. "This act," she said, "ensures that no soldier will ever be buried without honor, without truth, or without justice." Loretta stood nearby, hands behind her back, her chest full of grief and quiet pride. The act created independent review boards for racially motivated discipline, legal protections for service members facing discrimination, and direct civilian oversight of all state veteran processing. It also made it illegal for local law enforcement to interfere in military funerals without federal approval. A standing ovation followed. But Loretta didn't clap. She turned to the folded flag resting in the display case beside the governor. It was Terrence's. The same flag she'd been reaching for when a gun was pressed to her head. She whispered, "This time, son, we're writing the law in your name." The message traveled further than any law ever could. High schools began teaching Terrence's story in civics and history classes. Military academies rewrote their code to include a new phrase: honor is colorblind. Police departments nationwide reviewed their veteran protocols. Some resisted, many complied, but none could ignore. Even children, who once saw folded flags as symbols of sacrifice, now asked deeper questions. Why did this happen to him? Could it happen to my dad? Loretta received thousands of letters. From soldiers, from mothers, from people who never wore a uniform but carried battle scars just the same. One letter, written in a child's shaky hand, read, "Dear General James, I'm only 10, but when I grow up, I want to be brave like your son, and loud like you." She kept that one in her wallet, right next to Terrence's last photo. It was never about revenge, not even about punishment. It was about ensuring that silence never got to win again. And as the flag over the Capitol flapped in the breeze, one truth became clear. The lesson had been learned. Now it had to be lived. Arlington National Cemetery was quiet that morning. The fog still clung to the grass, and the air smelled of dew and memory. A full honor guard waited at the hill's edge. 6 soldiers, polished and precise, stood ready with white gloves and steady hands. This time, there were no barricades, no checkpoints, no guns raised. Just peace and respect. Loretta James stood beneath a canopy of oak trees. Carla held her arm. Walter, now leaning heavily on his cane, stood beside them. Terrence's coffin was lifted gently by men who had served with him. Each one black, each one silent, but their eyes full of fire. The funeral was not televised, not this time. Not for politics, but for the family. For closure. A bugler played taps. The flag was folded, carefully, slowly, with the weight it deserved. And when it was handed to Loretta, there was no threat, no fear, no chaos. Only the sound of her whisper, "You're home now, son," and I kept my promise. Carla leaned her head on her mother's shoulder, and the nation let out a breath it didn't know it had been holding. After the burial, the crowd didn't disperse. They stayed. Veterans, activists, students, old friends and total strangers. Some carried candles, others carried signs, not of protest, but of honor. One sign simply read, "Silent power is not weakness." Loretta stepped down the hill slowly, her uniform crisp, her heart steady. At the bottom, a small group of black cadets stood waiting. Each one wore a gray hoodie over their dress uniform. It was the same hoodie Terrence wore the night he filed his last report. The hoodie had become a symbol, not of rebellion, but of remembrance. One by one, the cadets saluted Loretta. One cadet, barely 20, spoke first. "General James, your son made us believe we had a place in this country." Loretta smiled, tired but full. "No," she said softly. "He made this country believe in itself again." Then she turned, lifted her own gray hoodie over her dress uniform, and walked through the crowd. No speeches, no applause, just silence. The kind that says we will never forget. Weeks later, in a quiet classroom at Fort Jackson Military Base, a new group of cadets gathered for orientation. The instructor, a stern but kind-faced woman, wrote 3 words on the board. Silent power stories. Today, she said, we begin with one of our own. On each desk lay a booklet, Terrence James on the cover, his timeline, his service, his sacrifice, and inside a letter from General Loretta James. To those who wear the uniform after us, remember, bravery isn't loud. It shows up when no one's watching. It holds the line when others run. And it speaks truth, even if its voice shakes. Across the country, young officers took that message into precincts, into classrooms, into courtrooms. The Sentinels were gone, but the silence they once fed on was gone too. Now there was light. Not blinding, not aggressive, but steady, earned, held by hands that had once been bruised but never broken. In a frame on Loretta's mantel, Terrence smiled in uniform. Next to it, a folded flag, and beside that, the same gray hoodie, neatly folded, never forgotten. And somewhere in America, another child asked, "Can I be like him?" The answer, without hesitation, was yes. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy, justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher, one story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.